Driving isn't just something we do to get to the job, it's part of our job. It's one of the highest risk activities we're engaged in, and we do it almost every day. Why is driving so risky? Why does the task that we are so familiar with and so experienced in set us up for incidents? In this video, we will examine how physical and cognitive hazards intertwine to make driving one risky activity.
Two Enbridge employees were called out to an inside odor call. While driving in a relatively unfamiliar and newly constructed neighborhood, en route to the call, one of the drivers pulled over to check for directions. As the employee pulled safely to the side of the road and put the vehicle in park, they noted a number of different hazards. Upon noticing their colleague coming up to the road, the employee decided to follow them to the destination. They pulled away from their parking location, stopped at the stop sign ahead, and then pulled into the intersection to follow their coworkers. When they did this, the roof rack on the top of their truck caught a chain hanging across the intersection, pulling it off their vehicle and onto the road behind them. Let's walk through some of the hazards that were present. Vehicle traffic, dim lighting, pylons in the middle of the road, and the chain hung across the road.
Did you identify all the hazards? Were there additional hazards you identified? We as human beings are wired in a way to increase efficiency, but sometimes that efficiency comes at a cost. Sometimes the way our brains are wired actually creates hazards.
Let us rewind to the beginning and consider some of those other hazards. At the very beginning of the video, we see our driver pull up to the side of the road and stop to check for directions. Have you ever been in an unfamiliar area and not sure where you're going? Sometimes being lost can initiate a limbic or fast brain response. The stress of being unsure of where to go can cause us to respond quickly and instinctively, rather than pausing to consider the hazards and risks.
After looking up the directions, the driver notices their colleague coming up and decides to follow them. When we switch our focus, it takes a while for our brains to catch up. If we don't give ourselves time to switch gears, this switching lag happens, and we are prone to miss some of the little details and forget the clues that they offer.
Perceptual disengagement is common in all people. This happens when our eyes and brains are taking in information, but they sort of stop talking to each other. Perhaps this phenomenon was in play when the driver moved to follow their coworker and noted that they had identified the sign hanging from the chain above them, but then didn't process the potential risk that it presented.
The Enbridge Human Factors program teaches us that sometimes we focus on the wrong risks, that sometimes we lose sight of the safety risks because we are paying more attention to other factors. Chances are we've all tried following someone to a destination, and chances are that when we did this, we became blind to many other hazards around us. In those moments, losing the driver ahead was perceived as a bigger risk than the potential safety risk present.
Finally, look at all the information and hazards the driver would have been processing during this short span of time. Directions, lighting, other drivers, physical objects and obstructions, the stress of following another driver. We all know that it is not possible for our brains to process information that requires conscious effort at the same time. So with all this information coming in, it's understandable that the increased perceptual load could cause a driver to miss something or for it not to register. This is possible. It happens all the time and can happen to any driver on the road.
If becoming blind to hazard and not processing risk are part of our DNA and how we are wired, how can we prevent incidents from happening? The first step is to recognize the mind's limitations, that we are wired to operate at a maximum efficiency, and this efficiency comes with a risk for error. When we learn that these things are possible and that they happen all of the time, it sticks with us. You will begin to recognize when your brain slips into these hazardous situations. Once you recognize it's happening, it's time to pull yourself out of it.
Take time to focus yourself so that you are mindful of the task at hand. Proactively identify potential hazards. Understand the associated risks and what you can do to control or eliminate them. Prioritize your tasks so that your focus is on the right risks. Eliminate distractions that could increase your cognitive load or disengage you from the hazards of the task at hand. Pause and think before acting. Taking a moment to breathe allows you the time you need to think about the hazards, assess the risk involved, and act safely.
Finally, share your experience and learnings. As you watched the video, you probably thought of a few times something similar could have or did happen to you. We are all capable of experiencing neuropsychological hazards like bias and human factors. Sharing our experiences and talking about them to prevent similar incidents from happening is important and necessary step on our path to zero.